The shadows in the corner aren't watching you, they're waiting for you to see them.
The Talisman. Chapter 1, A Glimpse of Normalcy. It started like any other day in the sleepy town of Hartsville, Oregon. Nestled between dense, misty woods and a winding river, the town had a way of trapping people in its quiet rhythm. Life here wasn't extraordinary, but it was safe, predictable. That's what I liked about it. My name is Nate Harper, a 32-year-old carpenter who'd lived in Hartsville my entire life. The mornings smelled of fresh cedar and coffee, the afternoons of sawdust and varnish. My life revolved around my workshop, a small, dimly lit space on the outskirts of town. I built everything from kitchen tables to rocking chairs for the people I'd known since childhood. Each morning, I'd grab a black coffee from the diner across the street and settle into the comforting hum of sanders and saws. My dog, Jasper, a scruffy mutt I'd adopted years ago, would nap in the corner, his tail thumping occasionally in his sleep. That morning, everything felt routine. The sun filtered through the dusty windows of the workshop as I sketched designs for a custom bookshelf. Life was calm, almost idyllic. Later that afternoon, I met Lily Barnes, the local antique shop owner. She'd asked me to repair an old rocking chair she'd picked up at an estate sale. Lily's shop was a treasure trove of oddities: porcelain dolls with chipped faces, tarnished candelabras, faded photographs of people long forgotten. When I arrived, she was dusting a shelf cluttered with trinkets. "Morning, Nate," she greeted with a warm smile. "You're just in time. The chair's in the back." As I moved through the shop, something caught my eye: a small wooden box, intricately carved with swirling patterns. It sat alone on a table, its dark surface polished to a strange, unnatural gleam. "Interesting piece," I said, pointing to it. Lily glanced over her shoulder. "Oh, that? I just got it in some estate down near Salem. Supposedly it's cursed." She chuckled, rolling her eyes. "Cursed?" I repeated, intrigued. "Yeah, you know how people love a good ghost story." Apparently, everyone who owned it had something terrible happen to them. Lost a fortune, got sick, that sort of thing. Probably just an old superstition. I laughed, but something about the box held my attention. It wasn't just the craftsmanship, it was the way it seemed to pull at me, like it wanted to be noticed. I took the chair back to my workshop, but my thoughts kept drifting to the box. That night, as the town settled into its usual stillness, I found myself walking back to Lily's shop. The streets were eerily empty, the only sound my boots scuffing against the pavement. The shop was closed, but Lily lived in the apartment above. She opened the door, groggy but kind enough not to turn me away. "You really came back for that thing?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I don't know," I admitted. "There's just something about it." She sighed and handed it to me. "If it means that much, it's yours. Just don't come crying to me if your dog starts talking or your house burns down." I laughed it off, but as I carried the box home, a strange unease settled over me. Back at my workshop, I placed the box on my workbench and examined it under the light. The carving seemed even more intricate now, almost alive. My fingers brushed against a small latch on the side. Jasper growled low from his corner, his hackles raised. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "What's wrong, buddy?" I asked, but he wouldn't stop staring at the box. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a small talisman, an object I couldn't quite describe. It was metallic but seemed to shift colors under the light, its surface etched with the same swirling patterns as the box. The air in the workshop grew heavier, colder. Jasper whimpered, retreating further into the shadows. I felt a sudden rush of dizziness, as if the room had tilted. A sharp knock on the door broke the spell. It was Lily. She looked pale, her eyes wide. I think I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "That box, you need to get rid of it. Now." But it was too late. The talisman was already in my hand. Chapter 2, Whispering Shadows. The next morning, the air in Hartsville felt heavier, though I couldn't put my finger on why. Jasper had been restless all night, pacing the workshop and growling at shadows that weren't there. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination, his and mine. The talisman sat on my workbench, glinting dully in the morning light. I'd tried to put it out of my mind, focusing instead on the rocking chair Lily had brought me. But every time I glanced at it, I felt a strange pull, like it was demanding my attention. "Just a piece of metal," I muttered to myself, picking up my tools. Jasper let out a low whine from the corner, his ears pinned back. That day, things began to feel off. It started with small, almost laughable incidents. Tools I swore I'd placed on the workbench were suddenly on the floor, or missing altogether. A gust of wind knocked over a stack of wood planks, though the windows were shut tight. When I went to fetch a cup of coffee from the diner, the waitress, Molly, paused mid-sentence as she handed me the cup. "You okay, Nate?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "Yeah, why?" "You look different," she said hesitantly. I laughed it off, but her words stuck with me. When I caught my reflection in the diner's window, I couldn't see what she meant. But for a split second, I thought the eyes staring back at me weren't entirely my own. That night, the noises began. The first sound was faint, like the rustle of leaves or a whisper carried by the wind. I was in bed, Jasper curled up at my feet. He perked up immediately, his ears twitching, his body tense. "Just the wind," I murmured, but I wasn't entirely convinced. The whispering grew louder, an unintelligible murmur that seemed to come from all around me. I turned on the bedside lamp, but the room remained still, silent. Jasper growled, his gaze fixed on the doorway to the workshop. My pulse quickened as I stood and crept toward the door. The workshop was dark, the faint smell of varnish lingering in the air. I flicked on the light, and everything appeared normal, until I saw the talisman. It had moved. I'd left it on the workbench, but now it lay on the floor, perfectly centered on the old rug. My skin prickled as I stared at it, the swirling patterns on its surface seeming to shift in the dim light. I picked it up, the metal cool against my skin. "How the hell did you get here?" I muttered, placing it back on the workbench. As I turned to leave, my reflection in the workshop mirror caught my eye. At first, it looked normal, just me, disheveled and tired. But as I stared, something shifted. The reflection lingered a fraction of a second too long after I moved. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. My reflection tilted its head ever so slightly, the way I hadn't. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, raising a hand. The reflection mimicked me, perfectly this time. "Get a grip, Nate," I whispered, tearing my eyes away. But the moment stayed with me. The next few days followed the same eerie pattern. Objects continued to move without explanation. The whispering in the night grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it felt like a presence, circling me, watching. Jasper's behavior grew stranger too. He refused to enter the workshop, no matter how much I coaxed him. He spent hours staring at the door, his hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his throat. I tried to rationalize it all. Maybe I was stressed, overworked. Maybe Jasper was picking up on my anxiety. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the talisman was at the center of it all. One evening, Lily stopped by to check on the rocking chair. She hadn't mentioned the talisman since she'd handed it over, but her eyes darted toward the workbench the moment she stepped inside. "You kept it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound casual. "It's just a piece of metal, right?" Lily didn't answer immediately. She walked over to the workbench, staring at the talisman as if it might spring to life. "Nate," she said finally, "I've been doing some reading about that thing. The stories, they're not just old wives' tales. People who've had it, they all said the same thing. It starts small. Little things you can explain away. But it gets worse. A lot worse." I laughed nervously. "You're scaring yourself. It's just a coincidence." Lily looked at me, her expression grave. "Maybe. But be careful, okay? If you start noticing things, don't ignore them." She left soon after, her words hanging heavy in the air. That night, I dreamed of shadows. They writhed and twisted, filling the room, their whispers deafening. In the dream, the talisman lay on my chest, its weight crushing me. I woke with a start, gasping for air. The workshop was dark, but something felt different. The air was colder, heavier. Jasper barked from the bedroom, a frantic, panicked sound. As I reached for the lamp, I heard it, a voice, low and raspy, right behind me. "You can't ignore me forever, Nate." I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was empty. The talisman sat on the workbench, its patterns glowing faintly in the darkness. Chapter 3: The Hero Faces True Horror. The moment I first realized that something was terribly wrong with this world wasn't dramatic or heroic. It was just an ordinary day, nothing special, except for the fact that I finally understood, this wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't stress, overwork, or intrusive thoughts. Something was truly threatening me, and perhaps even everything I once knew. The talisman on my workbench wasn't just reminding me of its presence, it seemed to demand my attention. And while I tried to push it out of my mind, I couldn't ignore what was happening around me. Every day, more and more things became inexplicable. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following my every move, my every decision. A few times, I tried to find a scientific explanation, even checked whether this could be some kind of psychological effect, but each time, I came to the same conclusion: this was something more than I could imagine. The talisman, and this place. My workshop had become the witness of something far darker than I could have ever anticipated. I realized it wasn't just following me. It was already here. The escalating danger. The night I finally understood that something sinister had broken into my life, it all started. Again, I woke up to that horrible noise, which seemed to come from inside my head. A rhythmic mumbling, impossible to explain. My pulse hammered in my temples as I heard the rustling tearing through the air, and I immediately understood, it wasn't just a dream. How I managed to get to the workshop, I don't remember. My steps were heavy, as if my legs no longer obeyed me. In the workshop, everything was dark, but through the window, I saw the light from the street lamp reflecting off the surface of the talisman. It began to glow faintly. When I got closer, it suddenly shone brighter. The unknown forces nearly paralyzed me, but even before I could take a step back, I saw it. A figure, or something that resembled a person, was standing in the corner of my workshop. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but its outline was far too realistic to be just an illusion. "You can't escape," the voice was low, a rasping whisper, reverberating through every cell in my body. I couldn't breathe, my gaze couldn't tear away from this creature. Something dark and otherworldly filled the space. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would break through my chest. Action and investigation. I couldn't leave this unanswered. Something big and ominous was standing before me, and it was my responsibility, either to unravel what this was or to be consumed by it. The first few hours were chaotic, and I didn't know what to do. But I realized, I wouldn't survive if I didn't understand what was going on. My hands were cold as I began searching for answers in the books I had collected over the years, trying to decipher all the mysteries of my craft. I spent days and nights looking for every mention of the talisman, of dark forces, of stories that might explain what I was experiencing. Eventually, I came across ancient records, broken pieces of manuscripts that described similar situations. And that was just the beginning. The talisman, as I learned, wasn't just a magical artifact. It was part of an ancient ritual that people once misused, seeking to empower themselves without realizing the price they would have to pay. These forces couldn't simply be controlled. The talisman bound its wielder to dark forces from other realms. This wasn't just a physical phenomenon. I could feel part of me drifting away from reality. From the moment I touched it, my body and soul began to change. I was no longer the person I once was. I couldn't tell if it was fear or the true process of transformation, but I felt that dark force sinking deeper into me, taking away my control. At that moment, I realized that the only thing I could do was destroy the talisman. But how? How could you get rid of something that had already become part of you? Chapter 4, Confronting the Horror. The Revelation of the Truth. I thought I had been unraveling the mystery bit by bit, trying to understand what had come over me, over this place, over the talisman. But the truth, when it hit me, was something far darker than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just the talisman, nor the strange, otherworldly entity haunting my workshop. It was me. The horror I had been running from, the evil creeping into my life, it had always been tied to me. I was the cause. The realization struck like a lightning bolt. I had done something years ago, something I thought was long buried in the past. A choice, a reckless decision, made in desperation, and I had never truly understood the consequences of my actions. I had been searching for answers, trying to find out who or what had cursed me, never suspecting that I was the one who had opened the door to the dark forces in the first place. The truth about the talisman came to light slowly, like a creeping fog. It wasn't just an object that could be controlled, it was an anchor, a beacon for the forces I had unleashed with my own hands. The ancient ritual, the curse, it all came back to me now. It wasn't merely a random act of fate. The talisman was a tool, yes, but it required a willing hand to wield it. And my hand had been the one that invoked it. The shadows in my workshop weren't simply haunting the place. They were drawn to me, to my soul, to my very essence. The darkness had taken root in me long ago, and now it was spreading, consuming everything I touched, everyone I cared about. It was me. I was the source. The complete collapse. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late. The talisman wasn't just a cursed object, it had become my curse. I had thought I could control it, that I could fix everything. But I was wrong. I had become the vessel for something ancient, something far more powerful than I could comprehend. Jasper's behavior had been the first sign. His growls, his refusal to enter the workshop, the way he cowered from the very space I once found refuge in, all of it pointed to the truth. He knew before I did. He knew that something was wrong, that I was no longer the person he trusted. And Lily had warned me. But I hadn't listened. The workshop, the place where I had once created, had turned into the heart of the darkness. It pulsed with a malevolent energy, a force that was now too strong for me to fight. The talisman had grown stronger with every passing day, feeding off the fear I had tried to deny. The more I resisted, the more I struggled, the more it tightened its grip on me. It was no longer just a thing I could destroy or remove, it had become me. I could feel the evil within me now, pulsing like a second heartbeat. I had tried to fight it, to suppress it, but it was futile. Every attempt to rid myself of the talisman, to banish the dark presence that had taken over, only seemed to strengthen its hold. I couldn't even escape it in my own thoughts. And then, it happened. I had gone to the workshop one final time, hoping to find a way to destroy the talisman. I had tried everything, destroying it, hiding it, leaving the town, but nothing worked. It always found its way back to me, always pulled me back to the place where it all began. I was trapped. As I stepped into the workshop, the shadows seemed to gather around me, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. They clung to my skin, crawling beneath it, filling my lungs with their foul breath. I could feel it, the darkness, the weight of it, suffocating me. I tried to turn back, but the door slammed shut behind me. The talisman lay on the workbench, glowing brightly now, almost alive. Its patterns were shifting and twisting, becoming more intricate, more dangerous. It was calling to me, urging me to take it once more, to complete the final step. I reached for it. But this time, there was no hesitation, no fear. I wasn't fighting it anymore. I was part of it. My fingers closed around the cold metal, and in that instant, I knew. It was too late for redemption. The darkness had already won. The last thing I remember was the scream, mine, I think, rising in my throat, echoing in the workshop, as the talisman's power consumed everything around me. The shadows surged forward, engulfing me, pulling me into the void. I don't know how long I was lost in that darkness, in that abyss. Time had no meaning there. When I finally came to, I was no longer alone. The town of Hartsville was gone. The world I had known was gone. And I had become the monster I had tried so desperately to escape. The evil that I had unleashed had spread, just as the ancient texts had warned. It was no longer contained, no longer bound to a single object or a single soul. It was free. And now, there would be no stopping it. I had failed. And the world would pay the price.